Okay, I'll be damned. I'm live. Good morning, everybody. Sorry for the mucho delay here. We started with one known technical problem, and that is that I can't see myself in the camera like I normally do, which is good and bad. I don't particularly like looking at myself on camera, but I can't see whether I'm in the right spot or whether I'm in the right position. So Adam's going to have to help me with that. And then we had another glitch of some other sort that started once we tried to go live here. So we are here, we are functioning, and Ask the Agronomist this morning kind of mimics the spring planting season of 2024. Not quite what you would like it to be. So we're going to talk about delayed planting. We'll talk about replant decisions. We'll talk about what's going on in fields. We'll talk about those scary subjects of hybrid switches, of potential prevent planting in some areas. What the prospects are to for yield potential for June planted corn or late May planted corn, and hopefully answer your questions as well. So I got Adam here with me. Thankfully, I'm glad I got a friend here today, because if I was having this kind of trouble by myself, I'd be having a mild panic attack right now. So, I'm getting distracted by Zach Bennis putting stuff in my chat here. So, thanks, Bennis. So anyway,
he's rattled this morning, Zach.
That's right. Yeah. I'm kind of high stress agronomy today. So anyway, hopefully, if there's anybody who's willing to put up with the level of quality that we're putting out here this morning, and anybody actually stays with us, and we actually have a live audience, I would love to get your questions as always. So please don't be bashful. We'll in full disclosure here, those of you that are stressing out because you're not done planting, I'm right there with you. On, see if I can remember this. So on April 25th, which was a Thursday, started raining on a Friday. On April 25th, I had 55% of my corn planted and 85% of my soybeans planted, and I was feeling really good. I had nothing up at that time because I hadn't planted anything super early, but we'd had a really good run about a week or 10 days before April 26th. Since April 26th, I planted 6 acres of corn on one day. I planted 60 acres of corn on another day. And we've done a little bit of tillage where we run cattle for the last 100 acres of beans that we need to plant. And I've actually got less planted today as a percentage than I did on April 25th. Because I've got more replanting to do than the 66 acres I've managed to plant since April 25th. And we are extremely wet right now, as are some of you. Now, there are pockets. I planted, had a huge plot day in Monmouth yesterday. Planting conditions in the Monmouth area are really, really nice. Now, there was a lot of not really nice planting that occurred at the beginning of this planting window that they've got. But the planting that's going on now in the Monmouth area is excellent conditions. So there are places that have had no rain in the last week, and there are places that have had 5 inches of rain in the last week. So it really depends on where you're at. Extremely spotty. Adam told me that where he lives, they had a couple tenths. You get 25 miles from there, it was 2 inches plus. So it's very, very scattered, very variable. And so really depends on, where you're at. Some people are done planting. I think everybody has now started, but there's some areas where, guys haven't gotten much more than started. There's areas that have had really good windows. There's areas that have really not had a good window since early April. And if you passed up on the early April window, your windows since then have been teeny tiny, or you've had to push things. And you guys know this. I'm not a pusher. I always like to think that we can plant when it's fit, and I would always like to wait that extra couple days to let it get fit. And I think conditions will always get fit eventually. But I get it. It's hard to wait for that, and it's frustrating to see guys that were patient all through April. That now that we're looking at late May, patience has been lost in some cases. So it's certainly been a challenging spring. I joked with people. A couple weeks ago that I thought the best corn had not been planted yet. But the way some of it's gotten planted in the last 2 weeks, that is probably going to have a hard time making that statement be true. So we're trying to get the best conditions we can, make the right decision, not knowing what that right decision is, and that's always a challenge. So let's focus on what we know, and here's what we know. We should stay the course with our intended hybrids and varieties at least until June. So my encouragement would be, if you've got 116 plus day corn yet to plant, that you stick with that through the end of May. The concern with full season corn in late May is not so much having enough heat units. We will get the corn to black layer, barring an early freeze. But you could have some elevated harvest moistures that you have to deal with. And some people are better set up than others to harvest high moisture corn and dry high moisture corn. And there's a trade-off there between bushels of yield and drying cost. And you'll have to make that decision for yourself. If you give up 25 bushels of yield, switching to earlier corn to make it drier, is that worth it to you, or is that not worth it to you? You should not switch to an earlier hybrid and assume you're going to get the same yield. If you switch to an earlier hybrid, you should assume a yield penalty, and I would assume somewhere between a 5 and 10% yield penalty. Could be less, could be more, but somewhere in that 5 to 10% range would be very realistic, probably closer to 10 than 5. So if you're talking 200 bushel corn, I'd say a 20 bushel yield hit if you switch from a 116 down to, let's say, a 108 or a 110. Could be less than that, could be more, but I think you're kidding yourself if you think you can switch to earlier corn and not give up some yield. And I would say if you get forced into a decision to make a shift to something earlier, don't go any earlier than you have to. Go down to a 110. Maybe a 108. 111, 112, something more mid-season. Resist the temptation to go to 105 and below. So I see people making 2 mistakes in these late wet springs. Well, more than 2, but 2 related to hybrid selection would be: you switch too soon and you switch too far. So resist that urge. Now I did let some guys badger me into some 105-day corn recommendations for spotting in holes. And, I don't think, a good 110 would be bad in that situation, but they didn't want to be harvesting through, 20% corn and hit a wall of 28% corn when they hit that replant. So they're trying to, make that harvest timing come in line a little bit by planting an early hybrid in those ponded, drowned out areas when you're spotting in a field. So I'll concede on that one. But if we're planting a whole field of corn and we're planting corn for the first time, I don't want it to be a 105. I joke with people that if it gets too late to plant 110-day corn, it's too late to plant corn. We should just switch to beans. So stay with the fullest season corn that you can stand. Our Purdue guide is our friend. So this one's a bit of an antique. I pulled this out of my desk drawer this morning. I notice on here I think it says 2009 on here somewhere. It says Monsanto Imagine logo on the back. So this is an antique here. But the information that's contained in these has not. Camera went to sleep. So yeah, so things are wonky here today. So I could not see my screen. It went completely black, and I already can't see myself in my screen. But when the whole screen goes away, that's disconcerting as well. So basically, these Purdue guides are, and you can get all this information online. You can get it from U of I, you can get it from Iowa State, you can get it from Purdue, you can get it from virtually any Corn Belt land grant university. And it's all fairly similar. You've got your replant charts, you've got your stand loss charts where you're trying to evaluate a stand and decide, is this 25,000 good enough to keep, or should I start over again? And there's just lots of decisions that lots of difficult decisions to make around that. And the later it gets, the more willing we're going to be to live with that mediocre stand that we got the first time. Obviously, if you've got drowned out areas where there's nothing there and you want to grow something there other than water hemp, we're going to need to get some corn planted in those areas. But if you've got a stand of 25, 26, 27, 28,000 that you were not happy with, that you thought, well, I'm not going to live with that. I can do better than that. If we're talking late May, you're not going to do better than leaving that. So I would say the later we get, the more liberal I'm going to be. Not often I describe myself as liberal, but in this case, I will. More liberal I will be about leaving or accepting or living with that initial stand that you had. I've talked to growers that have been making some tough decisions. They've got big areas and fields that they're not happy with. There's good corn in the field. They got to tear out good corn to get to the bad corn, or they've got to drive through good corn to get to the bad corn, or there's it's ranging from good to bad in areas, and you just there's just no way to do it without tearing up some good stuff. And so if you're tearing out good corn to replant bad corn, keep in mind you're going backwards on the good stuff that you tear out. You're going forward on the worst stuff that you replant, and you're probably treading water on the stuff that's in between. So, you really have to sit down and look at it, I think logically, if you're gaining yield potential on 20% of your acres that you're replanting, you're losing yield potential on 10% of the acres that you're replanting, and you're treading water on 50 or 60% of the acres that you're replanting, I'd kind of question why you're replanting. So we need to be going forward on more acres than and when I say going forward, I mean gaining yield potential on more acres than what we're, maintaining yield potential or potentially losing yield potential on to justify that replant. Soybeans are a little bit easier decision. We can spot in soybeans. I don't mind thickening up a stand of soybeans. I never want to see anybody try to thicken up a stand of corn. If there's truly nothing there in a ponded area, I have no problem at all just rolling in there with the planter and planting that. But if you've got 15,000 that survived from the first planting, you can't just go out there with a planter and drop 25,000 into 15 and say, well, I'm probably going to kill 5,000 what's there. So that leaves 10. I had 25. Voila, there's my 35 that I wanted. That's not a good program. If all we're trying to do is get some ground cover out there to suppress the water hemp, and we don't care what the corn yields, it's okay to do that. But if you're trying to raise a good crop, we really need to get the old stand out of the way, start fresh with a good new stand. So Adam, I don't know if there's anything on your mind relative to replant that we haven't kind of touched on here.
No, not particularly. I think you hit it pretty well. I mean, guys are aware of charts like this.
Yeah. I mean, Adam pulled up one of the replant charts just so you can see that. You've all seen these before. And the thing that people have a hard time believing on these charts is 80 or 90% of your yield comes from the first 15,000 plants. And then we're just adding gravy on that. So it is amazing sometimes. And I'll share an embarrassing story from my home farm from last year. I was using up some old plot seed, which is something I typically do. I forgot that this particular old plot seed I was using up was several years old, not just 1 year old, because it was being used for a particular special kind of trial, and I should have known that it might have maybe outlived its life expectancy. And we had some tough conditions, and the cold germ was probably pretty poor on that stuff, and it was in a farm that nobody was paying much attention to, and so we had 40 acres of corn that at about V6. The sprayer operator said, "Man, that stuff looks pretty thin. You guys maybe ought to look at that." And that corn was it was thin. It probably averaged around 20,000, and the worst areas were about 16. So it ranged from about 16 to 24. This hybrid had pretty decent ear flex, and that 40 acres made about 210. Now the rest of the farm was about 230. So it was off the pace, but it wasn't off the pace by 50% yield loss. It was off the pace by 10% yield loss. So these charts that tell you, I'm going to just pull up the chart in the Purdue guide here, just so I'm not making up numbers. But when the chart tells you that 22,000 planted in April is going to give you X percent of yield potential, and you're going, well, that can't possibly be. There's no way that I'm going to get 90% of my yield when I'm missing 15,000 plants. But actually you will. So Adam pulled up the U of I chart. These have been redone, by the way, over the years. I mean, so these were first done probably in the 60s, but they've been redone with modern hybrids. So we're looking at plant population 20,000 planted in April gives you 81% yield potential, and then you want to compare that to a perfect 35,000 planted June 1st is 78. So you might argue that a little bit, that I have had better luck than that with late planted corn. And I would agree that in recent years, we've had some very good years for late planting. And I've seen 260 bushel corn planted in June. I don't know that we can count on that. The average gives the advantage to the older stand. Recent history, with some of the crown rot issues we've been having with early planted corn, that gives the advantage to the younger stand. And so, this stuff is all, depending on, conditions in the summer, depends on rainfall, depends on how healthy, the old stand stays. If your old stand is riddled with crown rot in the fall, well, then it's almost always better to replant. If the old stand is healthy, the old stand may win. So, I think we have to look at the average. You can't just go off of what's happened on your farm the last 2 years, because that's not necessarily indicative of what's going to happen this year. And I think we're all pretty confident that we can raise good corn planted late, because we've been having success with late planted corn. In some cases, we've had more success with late planted corn than we have early planted corn. And I think that gives people, maybe a false sense of confidence of how good June planted corn can be. It can be amazing. It can be better than April planted corn. But I don't know that we want to count on that. But I will say this: I would rather take my chances on June planted corn fit than mudding something in the 25th of May. So I'm always going to prefer to do it right, even if doing it right means I don't do it until June. If you can wait a couple more days and let stuff get fit, I think that's always the best thing to do. I get it. That's a risk, especially in years like this, when sometimes your planting windows are small And if you're waiting another day or two for it to be better and it rains again, well, then we're right back in that same cycle. And eventually you get tired of waiting and you lose your patience and you just go do something even if it's wrong. And there's been a lot of doing something even if it's wrong that's happened the last 10 days in different areas. And anytime the field cultivator leaves the field stringing mud down the road, anytime the planter leaves the field stringing mud down the road, even if that mud only came from 10% of the field, conditions are not good. And we've been stringing a lot of mud when guys are leaving field. So the definition of fit keeps getting stretched, and just because you're not getting stuck doesn't mean it's fit. And one of my least favorite sayings of opening it up to dry it out. Been a lot of opening it up to dry it out going on, and anytime you have to do that, you're costing yourself yield. Are you costing yourself more yield doing that than you are waiting? I don't know. Nobody can answer that question, and that's why, even though I don't like a lot of what I see, I can't say which is the greater sin, because late planting is a sin and mud planting is a sin. I think late planting is less of a sin than mud planting, but you might feel differently, and it's your farm, not mine. So you gotta make that call. And hopefully, for all the stuff that got slotted in here recently, we get the right amount of rain at the right time to allow those roots to get established through that sidewall, which is going to be nasty. And we don't have a hot, dry, stressful summer, and 2/3 of a root system can raise a good crop, because there's a lot of stuff out there that I think is going to struggle to get its roots under it. And there's a lot of fields that are going to look pretty good when they're that tall. They're going to look pretty ugly when they're that tall. And then maybe when they're waist high, they'll look good again, hopefully. But going to be a lot of stuff that when we switch over from the seed to the roots goes, holy crap, when it has to make that transition. So just be prepared for that. Don't be surprised by that when you're forced to do the things that you did in some cases. Expect some ugliness when that nodal root system is trying to get established, but it'll grow through it. It'll get the job done. It always does. Just a matter of how difficult or easy it is. Okay, so I had a few notes here. Let's see. We kind of talked. Oh, one thing I want to touch on delayed planting. So you've probably heard about this 6.8 heat units per day that corn speeds up when it's planted after May 1st. So obviously everything that's planted from here on out is going to be well after May 1st. And the number of days you're planting after May 1st, there's an adjustment to the heat unit calculator that allows you to deduct 6.8 heat units per day of delayed planting from how many heat units it's going to take to get that hybrid to black layer. So basically, I did a little math, and roughly speaking, if you're planting 40 days past May 1st, which would be June 10th, which is probably about as late as most people are going to plant corn, that's about a 250 plus or minus heat unit deduction on how many heat units it's going to take to get that hybrid to black layer. So if it's a 2850, which is what a lot of 114-day hybrids will run, if it's a 2850 GDU hybrid, it's going to finish at about 2600 GDUs. And so that's how we're comfortable recommending 116-day corn planted up till June 1st. Now, it's likely going to be wet, but you're better off, we feel, with wet, high-yielding corn than you are with still wet, but just not as wet, lower-yielding corn. So if you plant 105-day corn that yields 25 bushel less, it's not going to be 14% either. So generally speaking, even early corn planted late, still going to have some moisture at harvest time. Now, you're going to be able to harvest it sooner. You're going to be able to harvest it at a lower moisture. You're going to save some money on drying, but depending on your drying costs, you might be hurting yourself more than you're helping yourself if you put anything out there too early. I also like to remind people that where is early corn bred for? Early corn's bred for northern latitudes, and it's hard for early corn to yield competitively always. The later you plant it, the more difficult it's going to be for it to yield competitively, because the more out of its adapted environment it's going to feel like it is. When you're a 105-day corn hybrid, you were not designed to pollinate in central Illinois in August. That's you're really out of your element there. And there are some that can handle it better than others. Seed company might not even know how well adapted that hybrid is to that, because we don't test them that way. Now, if it's an older hybrid that we've been through this before with, we might have some decent idea. But there's not a lot of data on, how's this 105-day going to do planted June 5th on my farm in Adams County, Illinois. You're on your own with that, because nobody has tested that yet. So just be aware of the risks of going too early on corn. Beans, kind of similarly, we don't want to early up on beans either. Now, I've got some guys that are looking for some group twos to spot in their holes out in fields, because they want to be able to harvest the whole field at the same time. So again, I'll give a little bit of grace if you're trying to match up maturities in a field, but generally speaking, I don't want to plant any group 2 beans in June. I would much rather plant group 3s, and I'd much rather plant late group 3s as we get into June. So you don't want to plant early beans late as a general rule. Those of you that are good double croppers, that you're using late 3s for double crop in a lot of cases, not group 2s. And so, we don't really want to be putting early beans out late either, and unless it's an absolute necessity. Now, if I haven't planted my 2.7s yet. The farm that we haven't planted yet was where I wanted my early beans. So I've got treated 2.7s that are going to get planted whenever that farm gets planted, just because that's what I got to plant there, and they're already treated. So you can do it. It's just not ideal. So we didn't really talk too much about crop insurance, but obviously that's going to factor into a lot of these decisions. I have not looked into my prevent plant coverage. I'm not even thinking about prevented plant yet. I've got 3 weeks yet plus that I would be willing to plant corn, and I would love it if we could get done here in the next week or so. But even if it's 3 weeks from now when I finish, I'm still going to plant corn. And it depends on, do you have your nitrogen on? Do you have your chemical on? Is it rented ground? Is it owned ground? What's your situation look like? But there could potentially be some acres out there, some really poorly drained acres in some areas that had some torrentially heavy rains. There was places that had 5-inch rains here in the last week, and depending on what forecast you look at, might be more coming next week. In that scenario, on poorly drained ground, you are potentially flirting with, some scenarios where prevent plant might look like the best option from an economic standpoint. So let's hope we don't come to that, but if we do, we do. We've been there before too. So we kind of talked about making those replant decisions as far as are we going forward in enough of the field to justify what we're doing. We talked about staying with full season hybrids. We talked about staying with full season soybean varieties. From a disease standpoint, one would expect to see some seedling blight, some damping off. The amount of moisture that we've had, you're going to have some disease. If you've got fields that look pretty good, that have good stands, that have gotten off to a good start, Might be a good year to invest in a V5 fungicide to help the plant health of those seedling plants as much as you can. You're probably going to see some seedling blight. That's one thing I do caution people on when you're looking at that thin stress stand of 25,000, trying to decide, am I going to leave this or not? If 5,000 of those plants got some brown roots and look a little sketchy, and you can see some discolored, root tissue, and the mesocotyl doesn't look perfectly healthy, that may mean that some of those plants are going to go ahead and die. And I've seen that before. You count 25,000 and you decide, okay, well, I can live with that. Well, then a month later, there's only 18,000 out there, because 7,000 of the ones that were there when you had 25,000 ended up dying. And in that scenario, we'd probably been better off to have pulled the trigger on a replant. So, I can't make your replant decision for you. Adam's not going to make your replant decision for you. We'll give you our opinion if you ask for it. But you know what they say about opinions. And you're the person that's going to have to make that decision on your operation. But the later we get, the bigger the corn gets, the more damage you're going to do to good corn getting to the bad corn. That those are all extenuating circumstances that need to be taken into account. So I don't know if we've had any questions come in this morning. Adam's been kind of
no, not so far. Been quiet on the question.
Been a cluster here this morning on Ask the Agronomist, so not making people feel like asking questions. You oftentimes come with good questions that your growers ask you, Adam. Anything come to mind that?
Lately, no, it's been mostly about having replant conversations and stand conversations, and what I need to be concerned about. What is a leavable stand and what isn't. You've covered a lot of that pretty well. And there's lots of good information that we referenced out there to use. But ultimately, I just tell guys, everybody's different.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, if it's something that I think you should leave the stand, but you can't stand looking at it because it's out your back door, that's your decision. And we'll get to the corn and try to help you get it replanted if it needs to be replanted. But for the most part, I think stands in my territory are pretty good. There have been a couple of fields that the entire field, due to some saturation issues, have needed to make kind of a whole field decision because it was just too much of a hodgepodge, patchy nastiness. It wasn't well defined. Hey, we can go replant this area or that area type thing. So, but we've lucked out for the majority of the acres and got really pretty good stands for most stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's, I know you guys have been struggling to get that last little percent, planted, which is frustrating. But we've got areas on the team that are struggling to get the last 2/3 planted, which is more frustrating in my mind. So you guys have kind of been in the lead all year long. I just traveled to Manhattan, Kansas last weekend for my daughter's college graduation, and the best corn that I saw between here and Manhattan was in your territory and just north of your area there in southern Hancock County. And that stuff that got in early got off to a good start before it got wet. Corn that was emerged by April 26th has had a huge advantage compared to corn that was not emerged by April 26th. And the stuff that went through that wet weekend, saturated soils, anaerobic soil conditions that had just gone in the ground, that was a pretty tough situation. I haven't seen a lot of differences between hybrids. Haven't necessarily seen even a lot of differences in planting dates from that week. Sunday that week is probably better than Thursday that week. But what trumps everything is drainage. You can find every poorly drained field, and you can find every poorly drained spot in every field. And those
tile lines are real evident.
Yep.
Over the top of the tile.
Yep. So it's, nobody has a tile system that's designed to handle what we throw at it sometimes. But the more the more well-tiled a field is, or the more well naturally drained a field is, the better that stand's going to be. And I've been in fields where, there's an area that doesn't look different. It's not a different slope. The soil does not have a different color to it. You can't necessarily, with your naked eye, see what's different, but the stand goes from perfect to 26,000 in that area. And so that corn plant could sense the environment was different, and it's drainage that made that environment different. It was either wetter, longer, had less oxygen in it, was colder, was something in that soil environment that made that spot different. It's the same seed here versus over there, but there's a 10,000, not 10,000, but 5,000 or 6,000 plants per acre difference in stand. And you can find those areas in almost every field. And sometimes it's pretty subtle. Sometimes it's a flat, sometimes it's a bowl depression area, sometimes it's a side hill, sometimes you can see some sort of topography that kind of makes it make sense, but occasionally it doesn't really look that much different than the good part of the field. But there's something about this area that made it worse, and it could be a different clay layer 2 feet down that you can't even see from the surface. But something was different about that environment. And the number one thing this year that's driving all the problems is lack of oxygen, saturated soils, anaerobic soil conditions, and whatever made the soil more anaerobic is driving all the problems that we're looking at. And yeah, there are differences between hybrids. There are differences between planting dates. But the differences in soil, I think, are trumping really all of the other differences that I have seen. And there's some fields out there that are just so wet, so poorly drained. Planting, it wouldn't have mattered whether you planted Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday of the week before it got wet. You would have had to have planted 2 weeks before that week to have had a significantly different outcome than the outcome that you're looking at. If that corn would have been V2 when it got wet, that stuff came through things pretty well. You can travel around, parts of Adams territory that had 5-6 inches of rain that first weekend, but it fell on V2 corn. And, that stuff is, unless it got washed out or buried in silt, that stuff's, pretty good shape yet.
Mm-hmm. One thing I have started having a little bit of conversation about, because how some of the guys in my territory have been fairly lucky in being able to get quite a bit in, is nitrogen loss.
Yeah.
Might want to share your thoughts on where we're at with what you think our depletion or movement of nitrogen situation might be.
Yeah, and the late planted scenario, that kind of impacts it's going to shift later in the growing season when that corn plant's peak need for nitrogen is. And we lose nitrogen from the system as you go through the growing season. And you could make an argument that if you've had a lot of water, or if you're planting later, maybe some supplemental nitrogen would be beneficial. If you're looking at reduced stands, well, you probably don't need additional nitrogen because your yield potential has probably been decreased. If you're planting late, your yield potential in theory has been decreased. But your nitrogen use efficiency is not going to be as good either in that late planted corn typically. So, you could argue that, either way. We've undoubtedly have lost some nitrogen. We've either lost it through anaerobic soil conditions, or we've leached it to a tile line somewhere potentially in a well-tiled field. So really all acres, I think, have probably lost some nitrogen. That doesn't necessarily automatically mean that you have to put more on, but it is something to consider. And if you are a person who, by God, I want to make sure I'm not short on nitrogen, you've probably got less out there for that crop than you did at one point in time. And whether it's enough less that you need to do something about it, is a debatable, arguable. People are going to have different opinions on that conversation, like a lot of things we get into in agronomy. There's that saying out there that, a lot of us, kind of subscribe to and kind of believe in, and that you don't want to give up on a crop. And so you don't want to just completely ignore the nutrient needs of your corn. And if you're nervous about that, now would be the time to address that. If you can get out in the field and do a side dress application of nitrogen, maybe you weren't planning on doing that, but maybe you kind of want to, just to make sure that you're not short. I'd a lot rather do it now than be doing something, with an airplane in July, because you've decided that, my corn's starting to fire a little bit early and I don't like that. So you're always better off to address those nutrient needs before you see the problem rather than after you see the problem. And that corn crop's going to use about 75% of its nitrogen, by the time it's tasseled. And so we need to get most of the nitrogen, into that crop, pre-tassel. If you're trying to win the NCGA yield contest, there might be a need for post tassel nitrogen. But for most of us that are just trying to raise good corn, I don't want to be putting nitrogen on after tassel. And if you get an opportunity to get it on, with a side dress application, when you've got V4, V5, V6 corn, that's what I would do. And we've got lots of spraying to do. We've got, the weather challenges. We've got, we had a hard time getting pre-emergent chemistry on. We probably still got some fields out there that don't have pre-emergent chemistry on them yet. That's probably first order a priority. Yes. They're no longer pre-emerged. If it's not emerged, it's because it's dead. If it's going to come up, it's probably up. So yeah, we've had to fight through that. I had a guy send me a picture of some dead but immensely thick chickweed that he wasn't sure exactly how it was on an HEL field that he wasn't supposed to work, and he didn't know if his planter was going to get through that or not. He didn't know how he was going to handle that. We had a brief little conversation about something I call fall burn down, and hopefully next year we'll prevent that situation. But that doesn't help him get the field planted right now. And I've seen some people that tried to do tillage through that stuff, and that's not a good look. We had that experience on our own farm. We had a little area of rye that was on the outside of the temporary electric fence that keeps the cattle in this field in wintertime. And so the cattle never grazed it. And when they sprayed the burn down, they didn't realize they were supposed to hang the boom out across the fence, because I didn't communicate very well. So you custom applicators out there that are listening, you'll appreciate this, how frustrating it is for you when your customer thinks you can read their mind of what they want to spray. Because if you sprayed something because you thought it needed sprayed and they didn't want it sprayed, well, then you're in the doghouse. So in this case, we had some shoulder high headed out rye that we tried to run through a tillage tool just because we had to do something with it when we were working the field. And my son spent better part of a day trying to string that stuff out uniformly through the field, and he's got the piles smaller than a doghouse now. So he helped the situation, and it's now been laying there for 2 weeks wet through rain. So that stuff's decomposing, and maybe we'll get it strung out a little bit better. But don't do your winter annuals that way. Do your fall burn downs and early spring burn downs, and don't let yourself get in that situation where you're trying to scatter out your muskrat huts in your tilled fields. But so still got some weed control challenges out there that we'll have to work through. Obviously, we're people that are trying to manage dicamba are going to be getting nervous as June approaches for those spray dates when we're still able to utilize dicamba post this summer on the existing stocks use order, and managing through that the best we can. We are past the date that you can move product around, so it had to be in place by May 12th. You can apply up until June 12th, assuming that, other label requirements are met. So we've still got, plenty of time to make those applications. And like we say, time and time again, it's hard to be too early. It's really easy to be too late. So if you're worried about having time to get it done, don't delay doing it. Just get it done. And we can still utilize the benefits of that technology here for a few more weeks. So with that, I don't think we've had any questions come in. So we're going to go ahead and end a little bit early, and I guess get your questions sent to your FSR if you've got things that you want to hear us talk about, things that you think would be beneficial for us to discuss on Ask the Agronomist. We'll be back in 2 weeks, which is the 30th? 30th of May. So hopefully maybe we'll be wrapped up planting by then, knock on wood. And depends on what model you look at. Some of the long range forecasts make late May look good. Some make late May look bad. I'm not sure any of them know what late May is going to be like until we get there. So we will learn that together. Thank you for your patience of sticking with us through our technical difficulties. We're 2 weeks in a row. We've been a little bit hamstrung by technology here. So that's one of the limitations of this platform, I guess. But appreciate your support and attention, and everybody stay safe. Get planning wrapped up best you can, and we'll talk to you again in 2 weeks. Take care.